It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears. Hello and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And today we are discussing Sappho'S Bar And Grill by Bonnie J. Morris.
Indeed.
I believe it is your turn to take the plot.
Okay. So Hannah is a depressed, non-tenured professor at some SUNY, and she's a Jewish lesbian who is sad, who has not gotten over her ex, and hates all of her students, and pretty much the only thing that gives her joy. And her dad's
dead. Don't forget.
And her dad's dead. And pretty much the only thing that gives her joy in life is going to the lesbian bar run by her friend, who she's from grad school, who she's had the hots for ever since grad school. And one day she's so self-pitying that she says, well, I would just like women's history to be my date. And this sets off a year of sexy time-traveling adventures where she gets to make out with lesbians throughout history and myth.
Yeah, I'd say that sums it up. I think it's almost insulting to ask whether there are lesbians in this book. There are so many lesbians in this book.
Pretty much everyone in this book is either a lesbian or a very bad man. And sometimes very bad can just be defined as student who wants an extension. But
yes, and historical figures who may or may not have been lesbians, they're at least receptive to the idea.
Yes, that's true. There's a few historical figures who are not lesbians, but, are fairly cool with it.
Abigail Adams may be DTF. I forget yes. If it's Sojourner Truth or Harriet Tubman who propositions her, or no, it's somebody else. But anyway, it's the author of America the Beautiful, whose name I have unforgivably forgotten. I must confess we looked this up on Wikipedia, despite the fact that history is about the memorization of names and dates. And the fact that we had to look at them so far away from our own brains means we don't really understand anything we're saying. Forgive us. I believe it is Catherine Lee Bates who makes a pass at Abigail Adams, but that is neither here nor there. Are there wizards in this book?
Well, I would say that the owner of the bar is a wizard.
Yes, certainly. And there's also the patriarchy. Yes.
In this case, the wizard is not the patriarchy. But there's both the patriarchy and wizards, and a wizard at least.
Indeed. And they're sort of flirting in a kind of, in a way, the wizard is pulling a series of increasingly aggressive pranks on our hero. If you want to look at it from that perspective. So you could say that they're in conflict.
They're definitely in conflict. The book seems to think that the wizard is that Isabel, the wizard, is mostly doing her a favor, but I'm not convinced by this.
Yes. Why should you read this book?
It's short.
True.
It's funny. Usually unintentionally.
Sometimes intentionally.
Sometimes intentionally. It's moderately entertaining.
Yep. I agree with those points and don't really have anything to add to them. Why shouldn't you read this book?
It's not very good and it's kind of turfy.
Yep. If you were like me and spent a number of nights in your childhood attending various women's groups that your mother went to.
Okay, honestly, this also could count as a reason why you should read this book, is the author does a remarkably good job of capturing and parodying. And this is when the book is funny. It's doing a remarkably good job of capturing and parodying a lot of, 70s and 80s feminist stuff.
Or 90s or
90s.
Yes. So if you have troubling memories of that, you may find this book, as I did, exhausting to read. Even though it is short, I had to pace myself even then. Yes.
So the other reason I think to read this book is that this is a fascinating example of something of turf nostalgia. And I think if you want to understand the turfy faux nostalgia for a feminist past and lesbian past that never existed. This really condenses it into one book in a way that I think is, I feel like I walked away from this getting some useful insight into the modern radical feminist movement.
Yes. I'm glad that you're going to be the one really wielding the bat here. Because I feel it is as if it is not as much my place to do so. I will
I
just.
don't know. I actually feel like you probably have, and you can edit this out if you want, but I feel like you have more childhood trauma from like some of the really awful side effects of this particular ideology.
Me, and I would say my brother actually had it worse. I think that my brother made it into his like mid-20s still believing that he was inherently evil. Something fell off my fridge in response to that.
But so yes, I will cheerfully wield the bat.
Yes. Suffice to say that, like, politics aside, the other reason that you shouldn't necessarily read this book is that it's just not very good. The writing is kind of lamentably bad in places. The quality varies a lot, actually, in a sort of weird way. It feels like this book was written over a very long period of time in small chunks, and was not then edited afterward to sort of pull the voices together or to make it flow.
Yeah, and it's interesting because like just when I would be like, "There's absolutely nothing worthwhile in this book," like there'd be a fairly funny or interesting scene, and then I'd go, "Huh."
Yeah, no, I mean,
then I'd go back to going
to its credit. Like, I'm glad that the book is not completely worthless, because if it was completely worthless, you could dismiss it out of hand. But it's much more, I think, interesting and profitable to actually grapple with some of the stuff that it's putting out there,
Right, exactly. And that is why I put it on the list for the podcast.
Exactly. But still, as a full work, it's not good.
No. I mean, yeah, I would say, I guess, a reason to read this is if you're kind of a tiki internet misandrist and you want something that will really like affirm your viewpoint. But I'm honestly hoping that people with that attitude aren't listening to the podcast. I can't imagine what they would be getting out of the podcast. So
I mean, maybe they're rooting against me. I mean, I am the wizard here. You're the lesbian. We are fighting. So, but anyway, let's head off to the spoiler zone to get into it. Content warnings.
Zone. Oh,
I mean, it would infuriate this person that we're doing content warnings for a start, because she's the kind of academic who likes to spring incredibly upsetting things on her students in order to wake them up.
Yes.
But so a lot of sort of almost prurient descriptions of historical violence against women, torture, rape, etc. Nothing happens to the main character. Like, the worst thing that happens to her is that she gets slapped once. But there's plenty of sort of almost gleeful descriptions of past injustice. And you say turf. There's like 3 things that are like actively turfy over the course of the whole book. If you're not reading carefully, you can miss them. But I would say that it's impossible, really. I mean, if you're sensitive to the tone at all, you know that it's there.
It's right. It's there's honestly a couple places where I feel like it reads almost as if the editor made her put in a couple of like
dog whistles,
grudging concessions towards
she leaves the T in LGBT, but she doesn't put the Q in.
Right. Well, and she's so mad that her department is, the women's studies major is being renamed gender studies.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's if you know what to look for, there's plenty there.
And it's also just like deeply bioessentialist. Like in some ways, I feel like something that's outwardly transphobic would be a little bit easier to handle because like you know you can see it and you can say, well, this person's just wrong.
Right.
But
again, it's like mask on versus mask off here. It's not like a trans woman walks to Sappho's Bar and Grill and either forces the bar to be shut down or is, driven out by women's magic, which is what I was half expecting to happen.
Right, but at the same time, if you're an immersive reader, then you're going to come out of this feeling like, you've dipped your brain into this world where, that just has such deep contempt for young people, for queer people who aren't, a very sort of classic model of lesbian, for men, including like queer men, for bisexual people, and just interwoven in the entire viewpoint, authorial viewpoint, is this just like bioessentialist view of womanhood that I think, that I think is really toxic.
Yes, and shout out to Alison Bechdel for giving this a glowing cover blurb.
Yes.
Anyway, on to the spoiler zone, shall we?
There are no heroes.
It's your ring of keys, boy. With your swagger and your bearing, you co-signed the book we're reading. With your short hair and your dungarees, you rode fun home. But let's go to the zone, the spoiler zone. All right. So, do you want to? I want to guess. See if you can guess. Like particularly the Halloween episode. What author this reminded me of?
Geez, the Halloween episode isn't one of the ones that stuck with me particularly well. Remind me what happens in the
Halloween episode. So the Halloween episode is the one that feels the most drenched in nostalgia. Like it's all nostalgia, right?
Yeah, I mean, is that no? The Halloween episode isn't the one where they go with the baseball, right? It's
right after that one. But it's specifically the one where she's going trick-or-treating and all the candy is like candy from her childhood.
Oh, that's right. Yes, that's right.
And I got the biggest whack of Harlan Ellison off of that.
Fascinating.
And also...
Boy, what a comparison that would make both people so mad.
I know, but they have a lot of things in common. They're both gender essentialist boomers, Jewish boomers, who think of themselves as extremely virtuous and extremely like... And when I say both of them, I'm talking about Harlan, the author, and this character, who I do not wish to conflate with the writer of this book.
Right.
Who think of themselves...
I don't even know if she is Jewish.
Exactly. Who think of themselves as extremely special, but also like are given to flights of rhetorical flourish, but cannot write human beings.
Yes.
And are just like really given to these feeling tone set pieces that are full of a false nostalgia for sort of an Americana that never actually existed, but did sure.
Honestly.
Yes.
Yeah, no. I was gonna say, for me, the Halloween episode felt a little bit more Ray Bradbury-esque, but for the same reasons.
Yeah, no. I mean, Ray Bradbury is a less insulting comparison.
Right. But honestly, like Ray Bradbury's stuff is also, there's a lot of misogyny there. It's just not as overt as Harlan Ellison.
Yeah, but it's like going into this thing with unstoppable righteousness, a belief in gender essentialism that cannot be blunted or turned away, and and this like deep weird nostalgia, and like a fascination with like man's inhumanity to man that seems to be completely devoid of actual empathy.
Yeah, so in this case, it's more a fascination with men's inhumanity to women, because
as soon as it left my mouth, I knew that you would.
I mean, it was right there.
Yes.
Sorry.
No. I appreciate your picking it up.
And Hannah would be very insulted that you phrased it as man's inhumanity to man.
I earnestly beg her pardon. And of course, the other thing that it reminded me of was every like college English professor novel.
Right. Except that she's not contemplating having, and she's not married and she's not contemplating having an affair with a younger student. Though she still enjoys
getting that flirty visit from the future, the college student from 100 years in the future.
Oh, and she totally enjoys when like Emma, who's not old enough yet to go to the bar, is still like trying to hit on her.
Yes. Yeah, no. I mean, the narrative is politically aware enough to know that that's not acceptable, but
right.
The energy is the same, and it's,
yes.
I would argue, like, very difficult to untangle that from this kind of nostalgia.
Yes.
And speaking of nostalgia, I think that, when we're looking at dead-ender philosophies, right, across the board, when they start like this dipping into myth and sort of mixing it with history, I'm about to say Blood and Soil, right?
I thought you were going to say Blood and Soil.
Yes. Am I wrong to say Blood and Soil?
I mean, it's a little bit of a. I would be careful using that about, a book that's also about a Jewish woman.
Well, but, who's doing something that is equally as important and brave as parachuting into Nazi Germany. By blood and soil, I mean nationalist myth-making. It's not just for nations anymore. Pick your demographic, make up a history, get stabbed in the back by the culture war.
Yes. Oh, all the times when she got told that being a professor at like SUNY Binghamton is as brave as fighting the Nazis, and was just
the modern day witches, they look like you. They're gonna burn. You're so brave for doing this when you know that they would burn you at the stake if they could.
It's so self-indulgent, and it's honestly, there's another content warning. It's just like, if you've had a bad experience with academia, this is going to bring back all sorts of frustrations.
If you've ever sat down with a boomer who was politically active in the 60s and 70s, you might have had a similar experience to this. But
right. And so what is fascinating about this book is that, with the exception of, the fact that marriage equality exists, this book reads like it really wants to have been written in like 1975.
I actually wanted, or
1980.
That's another point that really jumped out at me. It's like, for a book where the whole plot is, we're jumping back and forth between the future and the past. Is that the sense of when the present is incredibly loose.
It is.
Like, if I didn't know better, and it's like, I think that, ironically, the thing that really fixes it to a particular time is the Michigan Fest reference. But,
right, is the fact that Michigan Fest doesn't exist anymore, has just ended or whatever.
Right, that's the Women's Michigan Music Festival, who made a decision in 1991 to only let women-born women in. Although you could still bring your kid if they weren't over a certain age. I'm not clear on that part. I don't know when the sin of being male sets in. Anyway, they shut down rather than let trans women participate. Which happened in 2015, so that's when the book is set. Thanks, Wikipedia. But if I didn't have that, I would have thought this was pre-9/11. Like...
I mean, I genuinely would have thought, if I were reading this, when I started reading this, in fact, at first I assumed that it had been published in the early 90s, but it had been like written in the 80s, and it just like taken a while to find a press. And then I checked the date, and it was like, what, 2017?
Right. I mean, the bit where she, disguises herself as a trad wife to go to the, anti-gay revival meeting, like, all of that political language dates from the 90s.
Right.
That's not what's happening anymore.
Right. Incidentally, also the Michigan Fest stuff. Speaking of turf flags,
that's the most obvious one. Like,
I think her anger about women's studies being renamed gender studies was also a big one.
yeah, but yeah, you're right. No, there's her anger about women's studies being renamed gender studies, and also her contempt for the student who accuses her of reifying the gender binary.
Right.
There
but no, the like the sort of positing the death of Michigan Fest as like the death of true lesbian culture. To me,
Yes.
that was,
and also the tossed off equivocation of coming out to your parents as trans with announcing that you've gotten a Muslim boyfriend and gotten pregnant by him to piss off your parents.
right. Yes, that was also extremely turfy. But anyway, you'll not be shocked to find out that the author, who is of course dead, also wrote a book called The Disappearing L about the erasure of lesbian spaces and culture.
Mm-hmm. We don't have lesbian bars anymore. And the author, of course, the narrative spends a lot of time like thinking about intersectionality. Like, why is it racism, sexism, or homophobia that is why we don't have lesbian bars anymore? Except of course in this eternal present we do have lesbian bars.
Right.
And we or classism.
Yeah, she's surprisingly uninterested in classism.
Yes, which is incidentally, capitalism is probably the primary reason why you don't have lesbian bars anymore. But that's a different discussion entirely.
That and the fact that now there's other safe places for lesbians to meet.
Yes, and also that
I mean, dating apps is actually why we don't have lesbian bars anymore.
This is true. So it turns out that all of the women who don't want to like become warrior dykes, she really likes the military, and she does spend a little bit of time hand wringing about it. But
yeah, no, she really likes the military.
She really likes the violence and the and the masculinity, for lack of a better word, of her culture, where everybody like razzes each other, and it's it's like going into a bar with the boys. When you're a member of a dispossessed class, you look at the people in charge and you wonder why you don't have what they have. The right to make your own destiny. The right to live absolutely free. The right to exploit others for your gain. Seems pretty fun. It's how we end up with stuff like redacted.
Yeah.
Which is it's interesting how that sits right beside the misandry without really touching.
Well, that's some classic radical feminism for you. Well, at the same time, like she's so into the sort of like masculinity and violence and warrior dyke with the double-headed axe, but at the same time, it's made very clear that part of the problem with erasing women from history is that women are the life givers. Yeah.
No, I'm gonna tap that Ursula Le Guin quote that we brought up.
Yes.
With Marion Zimmer Bradley again, is like you're not doing yourself any favor by insisting that there is a women's magic. I'm gonna let you go. I've already talked too much after I said that I wasn't going to, which is classic male behavior, I'm afraid.
So I do want to return to the academia thing a little bit, and not just because I'm, an escaped former academic, but like the way that she's so angry and resentful of sort of the academic system while also being so deeply invested in it is, fascinating and frustrating. And I think, it's an example. So the thing is, well, there's parts of this book that are just terrible. Like in terms of writing, just badly written, badly crafted.
Yes.
But it's so evocative in certain ways. Like, it does such a good job of evoking the, the victim complex of precarious academics.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's like, guys, there are other jobs out there, I promise. You do not have to keep doing this to yourself. And it's you're not actually, like, staying in academia and working without tenure, you're not actually being a hero on par with, the anti-Nazi resistance.
I wonder if we could draw an analogy to another system that this person is intent on propping up, even as she complains about how it subjugates and demeans her. The gender binary.
Right.
I mean, this is it's the problem with this ideology, and with a lot of ideologies that are similar to it, is like, and this came to me because it was like, oh, you're so close, because she spends a lot of time talking about how, about the contradiction between, like, she's a Jew, and a lot of her lesbian heroes from the 19th century were upper class British racist anti-Semites. And right. So she's like, yeah, I guess at the end of the day, we're all humans, we have to just
we all have our flaws.
We all have our flaws. I mean, we have to work to get better, and we're gonna. And she's very insistent on how, like, we're having all these discussions about race and trying to bring people in,
Mm-hmm.
Although, of course, the space that she is in is a profoundly white space where they are continuously discussing how othered the non-white people in it are, rather than, doing anything with it. But
right.
It's like, okay, can you go a little bit further with that? Can you consider
right?
maybe that this new class of discrimination and oppression, this next generation of things that we're trying to bring into the fold, and these new changes that we're trying to make, might be a part of the same historical process? But she can't. And the reason that she can't is because this ideology depends on women being separate and women being demeaned. Like, if you...
Right, and it's...
Sorry, go
ahead.
And
it is the same sort of glorying in your persecution complex. And also, I mean, the fact this ideology, she's willing to say, oh, it's okay that, the lesbian writers of the past were anti-Semites because, they still give us valuable lesbian stuff. But it's not okay that, the Jewish men of the past were, misogynist.
Yeah.
And, like, she's just so incapable of extending sympathy to anybody who isn't, who doesn't meet her definition of a woman.
Yes.
But, so I do want to return to the academia thing, though, because it's also just her deep contempt for her students.
Oh, God, I mean, it's so insulting.
It's so insulting. Like, she's contemptuous towards, the students whose politics are more radical than hers. She's contemptuous, obviously, towards the male students. She's contemptuous to the female students who aren't sufficiently, liberated and radicalized. And she's even contemptuous towards the students who are really into the class and think she's hot and cool and want to be like her. But, those are teachers' pets.
Yeah.
Like, there's this deep, she has to be the smartest person in all of Binghamton.
Yeah, and, like, the place that the most jumped out at me was that she does this book, like, checks off every boomer hand-wringer that you've ever heard over the course of its short length. And the one that made me howl was the kids these days, they aren't learning the basic skills that we all grew up with. They don't know how to sew or cook, or, like, they can't make things. They can't engage in women's work, which, of course, if you've ever met any, remotely crunchy young person, is complete bullshit for a start, but also is just this classic boomer thing of, why aren't you coming up? They punch down and punch down and punch down. Why aren't you learning anything? As they refuse to see their spaces, as they refuse to teach, as they refuse to mentor. It's like, because they can't really reckon with not being the most important generation in the world.
Yes. And I mean, the thing is that Hannah is probably Gen X. if
her
she's,
childhood in the 60s means that she would have been born in the 50s. So,
well, but see, so like this is again the sort of thing that makes this book so lost in time, is that there's no way that she's an untenured professor, and I know she's untenured because if you read the sample of the sequel, she gets denied tenure. So there's no way, and that, which means that she has to leave. And the tenure clock is like 10 years at the most. So she's been, she's been at SUNY since 2007, which means.
And she was she's like a grad school straight out of.
Right.
So yeah, no, the timeline doesn't add up.
So let's say 10 years. Let's give her a generous 10 years for grad school, and that that gets you to 1997. So yeah, I mean, she would have been attending college in the early 90s. She's Gen X.
But her childhood was in the 60s, textually. Right. So
right.
There
exactly.
You go.
But see, this is this is what I mean by this. This book really wants to be. I wish that she had just set the book in like the 80s.
It would have made much more sense.
Right.
It's like the absolute refusal to grapple with anything that has happened in like these spaces of activism or social critique since the year 1998.
Right.
Is maybe the most infuriating thing about it.
Yes.
It's like this was all set in stone. The most important, I mean, let's say so the job of being a historian, right, is you take a sorry, do you want to take this? Being the person who actually has a PhD in history as opposed to me.
I mean, the thing is also, she's a bad historian.
Yes, no, obviously.
She's a bad, like, the point of being a historian is that you're supposed to critically analyze the past while, like, also critically analyzing the ways that we've previously thought about the past. And she's not doing any of that. Like, has she read, like, I can't even tell if she's read Judith Butler.
No.
Incidentally, it was like mandatory reading in my extremely, still conservative, hidebound history, seminar, first year history seminar.
Yes, no, we don't
like
have.
This is a women's studies professor, like assistant professor, who has like not read Judith Butler.
No, but what she has done is chosen her, like, her shadow cabinet of dead white men, except they're dead white women. Like she's consecrated an alternative canon and is appalled that you don't recognize the litany of names that she just lays out here without explaining who they are.
Which is bad history.
Which is bad history. It's bad teaching. As is,
right.
like, every incident of teaching that she does, that she, says in the book is also bad teaching.
Right, everything she talks about her class is just bad course design. Like, the idea that a women's history class can just be, let's go through a bunch of actually fairly famous women who all have Wikipedia pages and talk about how nobody talks about them. Like, that's a terrible course.
Yeah.
No wonder she didn't get tenure.
Yeah, and, like, this book has so much wrong with it. It's really, I mean, what it does is that it makes me, what I came away from this book with was a feeling of profound sadness for my mother, for women like my mother, for people who are so grounded in this, like, idea that, and as you said, this idea of perpetual victimhood, that, like, they just cannot see past themselves. The sheer level of self-involvement and egoism that just ripples off every page in this is like, it curdles you, It's like, you're so involuted, and not in the cool invert way, like, Radcliffe Hall, like,
Right, and I mean, so, but I find, as a historian, though, of late imperial Chinese law, so, but, I find this book fascinating as this historical document, because the thing is, like, because it's really trying to capture the idea of this disappearing lesbian space and this disappearing lesbian identity. and the sort of like, which is kind of why it's so unset in time, right? Is that she wants to set it in the modern day so that she can have all the sadness of what we've lost, but she also wants to set it, in the 90s so that we can still have these spaces that she's mourning. And this is sort of one of the many irreconcilable contradictions at the heart of the book. But it's so fascinating to me because we have read lesbian books from the era that she's nostalgic for, and they are not nearly this turfy.
Correct.
Like, the thing is, like the Gail Baudino, Gossamer Axe, that's exactly the sort of culture, right, that she's trying to reach back to. It's like women,
or the Dyke and the
woman
Dybbuk.
is life. Right, or the Dyke and the Dybbuk. These are two, the Dyke and the Dybbuk, you've got like radical Jewish lesbianism.
Right.
But the Gail Baudino stuff, I'm particularly, because I've also read other stuff by her, including an extremely bizarre trilogy about a woman who wants to study, like, women's literature or whatever, who's a grad student who's being oppressed by the patriarchy. But it's much more interesting because she goes to another world and, like, gets to ride a dragon. So, like, we've read these books that are angry at the patriarchy, that are angry about homophobia, that are, like, really into the idea of, of women, and lesbians, and are really grounded in this, like, disappearing culture that Morris wants to bring back. But they are not turfy. Yeah. Like, both of them have decent men in them. Yeah. Multiple decent men. Like, they have the idea that, because part of it's that a lot of the, like, crunchy pagan stuff that the stuff was found. First of all, there was still some, solidarity between lesbians and gay men.
Yes.
This book seems to have forgotten that gay men existed. But also that, there's these, part of the crunchy mysticism, and it's still kind of bioessentialist, is at least, like, the idea that there was a balance. Like, the Dyke and the Dybbuk has this sort of idea of the solidarity of the oppressed.
Yeah, that would be nice to have in here, by the way.
Right?
I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, the tones of the discussions that they have about oppression and, and, like, race and intersectionality are all very familiar to me from lawyer dinner parties.
Right.
But anyway.
So, like, the Dyke and the Dybbuk has, the gay cousin and his boyfriend, or his partner, the doctor. But I want to go back to the Gail Baudino stuff, the Gossamer Axe, and some of the other stuff that she's written, because, again, like, it has the vibe that this book is pretending to have.
Yeah. And
in fact, in the grad student goes to another world and gets to ride a dragon, there's an entire plot line that's very much a trans allegory. It's men get forcibly turned, evil patriarchal misogynist male soldiers get forcibly turned into women, and then just spend the rest of the trilogy having to deal with this. And there's a woman who, despite the fact that she predates this book by several decades, by like almost 30 years, I think, over 30 years, is very much sort of a parody of this person. She's specifically an angry transphobe who is proud that she drove a trans woman out of, like, a radical feminist space. And the narrative absolutely paints her out as a bad guy. Even she knows that she's, like, fundamentally broken and needs to heal. So it is both angering, but it is also fascinating. The idea that you can be so nostalgic for this vanishing world of lesbianism without realizing that, like, the trans people and the bisexuals were there all along.
Segue to modern turfism.
I mean, no, it is deeply ironic that, like, modern turfism, and to be fair, this has become much more pronounced in, like, the 5 years since this book came out. But, like, modern turfism is leading more and more and more into anti-Semitism.
Yes.
But, like, there's entire strains of turfism now that are specifically the Jews are stealing our girls and making them transgender. Making them transgender boys, and are like, and that, like, trans women are like, you know, it's the exact same thing. It used to be that the Jews are using black people to destroy white culture. Now it's the Jews are using trans people to destroy gender.
Yes.
But like, so.
I mean, I've seen this happen.
Right.
I've been to church in Brooklyn, or to synagogue rather. I've been to Reed College.
So I mean, you know, this is. There's so many things I wish I could just like yell or have, you know, a productive dialogue with this author about, and one of them is, why are you siding with these people? These people hate us.
Because you can't there's a core of the ideology that you cannot let go. You know, this book, if I can go back to like the structure of the book, right?
Right.
Speaking of ways in which the book fails, like what this should be is like a Christmas Carol portrait of a person in crisis where, you know, in the beginning she is so down on her students because she, you know, of her contempt for them, and she's all burnt out. She should be going through this and reconnecting with the thing that really brought her joy. But instead, instantly, she's full of the same contempt and the same beliefs and the same, you know, anger and the same, it's just, like...
Now she feels better about herself.
Now she feels better about herself. Exactly.
Right. And now she feels, like, more self-righteous about, like... No wonder her girlfriend left her.
Right. But I mean, but like, just to look at it as a book, the reason this book doesn't work as a book, like it's barely a novel, is that there is no character arc. And the reason that there's no character arc is that it would require this person to actually, you know...
have, you know, come to, like, believe that she had a flaw.
Right. Come to grips with something about what she's doing rather than instead just basically have all of her worst instincts, you know, reinforced by everybody around her.
Right. Like, this book is so because she can't have any flaws because she's this embodiment of this, you know, disappearing, like, lesbian archetype.
Right, exactly.
And, you know, so thus she can't have any flaws because, like, she is what the book is, you know, is, like, simultaneously mourning and glorying in. And you know, which, again, is just, it's so funny because she's something that never existed.
Yeah.
I mean, like, she's a kind of person who totally existed and still exists to this day.
Yes.
But, like, you know, they're, like... The past is never pure.
Correct. You know, it's like I would almost take the Book Eater's model of narcissism over this because at least the hero of the Book Eaters knows that she has done bad things.
Yes.
You know, there's at least the possibility there, even as the world makes excuses for her. But in this case, it's just like, no, I am in fact going to disappear up my own ass. I'm going to go into my canon, my fantasy, my heroes, some of whom are bloodthirsty, murderous pirates and like czarist women's Russian soldiers. You could have taken any of the Stalinist women's soldiers. Why'd you have to go with the czarist ones, for Christ's sake? But like, and you make them talk like this because you cannot write dialogue.
Yes.
And like,
yeah, she really can't write dialogue.
No, she can't. People don't talk with semicolons.
Well, some of us do.
Okay, I do, but people have a hard time understanding me.
Admittedly, I mostly talk with M dashes. But anyway, it's funny because like there is some talent here. Like she's so good at scene setting.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, it's feeling based.
It's feeling based, but she's so good at setting tone. She's so good at like evoking a kind of person. Like her writing is very evocative of specific
100%.
people and places and times, though not the times that they are in the book. Like the whole thing with the like radical feminist lesbian satyr, spot on.
Sure. I mean, once again, I think of Harlan.
Right. No, exactly.
The strengths and weaknesses really do line up.
Yeah, exactly. Including just like this deep misanthropy. But it's sad because the places where the book is at its best are when it could totally be read as loving satire. But there's no satire there. Because satire, again, would like involve admitting that there are any flaws to this, other than, flaws of the distant past, where, yes, in the 50s the lesbians were racist.
Yeah, and the bit about the lesbian colony that her friend had to leave because the processing. Then
Yes.
she goes back in time and proceeds to like process for 3 hours with a dead pirate queen, and
I know.
yeah, no, it's once again, it would be funny if the author was a little bit more self-aware.
Right, like the thing is, and you see this in The Dyke and the Dybbuk, which is really funny.
Right, exactly.
And so also this lack of being able, because humor involves good humor involves like some grain of vulnerability, and this like unwillingness to have any of that. It's really unfortunate, because in some ways it brings the book down, because if this book had been written with a sense of fun, it could have been like a modern day Dyke and the Dybbuk type, like, ridiculous lesbian romp.
Yes.
Which also would have meant that the end, where it's like, well, Hannah is a palindrome, which, did you ever have to read that story in language arts class in like 2nd grade?
Yes.
Right. So, and that Isabel, because time is a bell.
I was going to say that where other books might have wit or humor, this book has puns.
But like, they're not even good puns.
No, dicademic is not a good pun, and she says it so many times.
I don't think that's a pun. I think that's just a portmanteau.
It's so bad. Anywho,
I have a soft spot for portmanteaus, but dicademic's not a very good one, though.
No, it's not.
But the thing is that, okay, the idea that like all this magical time travel stuff could be is because of palindromes and pun names. Like, that would be funny if the book had earned any humor. But as it is, the only genuine bit of like funny that isn't unintentional satire is like the last line of the book, which is genuinely funny.
Remind me what it is.
It's, she's Isabel's like, I have something to tell you. And
right.
Finally. And then Isabel's like, I know where Amelia Earhart is. Let's go find her.
Yeah, no, that's hilarious.
That was like,
And on purpose.
Right, yeah, exactly. Like, there's one good joke in the book, and it's the last line.
But, that's sort of the problem, is that I have a page of notes written here, and I have "so earnest" in giant capital letters.
The thing is, I like earnestness. I know you find it kind of cringy, but I like it.
Well, you can't have a story like this and be this earnest, as you point out, right? Like, it's the
right.
And like, there is also another kind of earnestness. There is another kind of truth, where I would argue that despite the fact that Gossamer Axe and the Dyke and the Dybbuk are extremely silly, like, they feel emotionally true.
Yes.
Because when you get into this giddy mode, you can have like these sort of like religious or non-rational like interfaces with a deeper truth.
Yes, I mean, because you can have like metaphor, and again, though, it requires
Poetry.
Vulnerability.
That's
Yes.
That's exactly what I was saying. It's like you have to be able to put down your armor for a second. And like, the story should be, it is possible to write this exact story and do it well. And
Yes.
One thing is that these events actually have to have an effect on the protagonist's personality in some way, or make her rethink
other than
things.
again just like making her feel better about
Right.
making her feel more self-righteous.
Right. So, and it's like, it feels like that's what Isabel's trying to do, but fails.
And it feels like the book, the book thinks that Hannah's tragic flaw is her self-doubt, and
Right.
and thus removes it, but like allows her to overcome it. But like, her self-doubt is actually her only path to a genuine redemption, and she loses it.
Yeah. And it's like, if you had a character in the middle of this who was actually sort of capable of abandon, for lack of a better word, the whole, like, racing out of the homophobic church with these with this ridiculous collection of women would have been like gleeful and funny. And,
Yes.
it's like that idea is good, but it's got this anchor of righteous indignation and pride and like fury attached to it, which means that it can't soar.
Right, and which is really unfortunate because we were alive during the 90s. I was alive and going to an alternative school for dysfunctional queer kids. Like, and we had fun.
Yes.
It was fun. Like, obviously we were at that school in many cases because of the oppressive violence of homophobia, but like we looked around us and we could make fun of them. It could be funny.
Messing with your gender identity is also central to the premise of the dyke culture this book celebrates. What is being a butch if not blending bits from different genders, gender fucking, if you will, gender queering, if you will. Oh God, don't call out that part. Yeah, I mean, rather than putting a rotten or like throwing a rotten egg at the town's most notorious homophobe in capital letters.
Right, and honestly, part of what again, even in the 90s, being like a queer teenager at a queer school in the 90s, like part of the fun that we had was messing around with gender.
Yeah. Yes.
Like, just this book, Hannah's just denying, part of why this book has no joy is that she's denying herself so many opportunities for joy.
You could retain so many things about this book and they would come off as joyful. Like even Lilith making out, that's funny.
Right.
That could be joyful.
I would like to note that Leora has a t-shirt that says, "It's Lilith and Eve, not Lilith and Steve."
That's good.
Which she has, in fact, worn into the Haredi grocery store.
You could, like, wait, there are these moments in these past things where it's like you could do something good with this.
Right.
Without even changing many of the ideas. Like, take away some of the weirdly, crypto-fascist, like, warrior shit. Have her meet Marsha Johnson, maybe even kiss her. I'm not saying you have to. Nobody's saying you have to, but you could.
Right.
And pick a time that it is so that you're not talking about how even now queer children are taking the Greyhound to San Francisco and Greenwich Village. Are you out of your fucking mind?
Yes. I know, right?
Look around you a little bit so that the present is like actually in focus so that the past can feel different from this weird fantasy present that you live in. And then this would have been a fine book,
Yes. I would also...
And like also maybe not be as much of a fucking turf.
Right.
Possibly.
I now like to just be cranky a little bit about the Judaism.
All right.
Because, so again, this is a very accurate depiction of a specific kind of like Jewish feminism. The idea of like Lilith and Eve and Miriam are like lost mothers and stuff. But it's so funny because what a lot of contemporary queer Judaism looks like is things like neopronouns for God. Instead of saying, "Oh, well, we erased the goddess archetype, and thus it has become purely patriarchal," going, "Actually, let's read all of the gender bending and trans stuff that's in the Talmud."
See the Dyke and the Dybbuk.
Right, exactly. And like that's the direction that it has moved. Into the idea isn't that there was this gender binary at the heart of Judaism and that like patriarchy won. It's the idea that we can, it even has the idea that there's these like, that we have to recover a queer past out of like our texts. But it isn't, it's about, we don't like God. It isn't, God doesn't have to have a goddess counterpart. God can just encompass all genders.
Yes.
Um,
And like that's,
so
I mean, if you'll pardon me saying this as a more lapsed Jew than you are, or you're not lapsed at all. You're in fact the opposite of that.
right,
Um, a
a less
is
frum, as Leora would say.
right. Uh, is that's the beauty of Judaism is one of the reasons that it has had the longevity that it has is that it is, you know, as Jews we are, you know, champion literary critics, or and readers, and you know the text is so universal that you can shove whatever into it that makes sense for the modern world, and it's like, you know, that way of looking at it may have made sense in the 1970s, you know, but it's 50 years later now.
It's 50 years later now. This book came out in 2017.
I also had to go and check the publication date. And when I saw that, I was like, what are you doing? Look around you, touch grass, go outside, you know, don't stop talking about how your students are always on their phones, and maybe like look at what's happening in the world. Maybe go on the internet. You might learn something.
You're right. It's just, I mean, the things, you know, the infuriating thing about this book is the lost potential, and it is the lost potential that's like inherent in turfism, is that turfism has chosen false nostalgia over, you know, false nostalgia and like siding with the patriarchy over joy and a sense of humor.
Okay. So I'm not going to sell blood and soil again, but what I will say is it's obvious. Like, what do you call a movement there, which is like, okay, things have changed too much. Stop, go back. It's conservatism.
Right.
And all conservatism is alike, you know?
Right.
All conservatism ends up serving the same goals, you know?
Right. And you know, it's just, I'm glad that we did this after we'd covered other like genuine retro books so that we can really see. But you know what? I will note there's one retro book that we covered that really does feel very much in line with this.
Oh, you're not going to say Marion Zimmer Bradley, are you?
Of course it's the Renunciates. This really feels like it is nostalgic for the Renunciates.
Yes, it is. It absolutely is.
Right? And you know, this is why I wanted to read the Renunciates in the first place, is that like there is still as much as, you know, as much as I really love queer literature and queer science fiction, particularly the ones that involve girls kissing girls, there is still this rot that is in the past, and we cannot just like gloss over it.
Yeah. You know, I might say something about how the thing that really upsets her about the much older woman who loved her and left her is not that this much older and more experienced woman loved her and left her right as, you know, she was getting out of school and getting a handle on the world. But
yeah, she was like 19 or something.
Right, but that this much older woman loved her and left her for
a man.
You know, you might be
right.
missing something, is all I'm saying.
Right, exactly. So, yeah. So that was Sappho's Bar and Grill.
What a unfortunate piece of work.
What an unfortunate way to approach the world.
Yeah, it again, I will go back to the major feeling tone that I got off of it, which that it just seems exhausting.
It does. She seems exhausted, and she doesn't seem exhausted because of the weight of the patriarchy. She just seems exhausted because she has decided to make her life miserable.
Yes. Also, just a little note. There might be another reason that dating apps and such have replaced gay bars is that we don't all want to be drunk all the time anymore.
Right.
Which is another exhausting aspect of this book.
Right, because she drinks all the time. I mean, it is not as bad as Payback's a Witch, where everybody's getting like
but I was reminded
smashed all the time. Right, but like the fact that the main thing that seems to bring her joy in life is alcohol. And I mean, yes, it's alcohol in like a
magic
collegial
alcohol
environment. I think that the same thing that you said about...
It's the magical booze of Hildegard von Bingen. Sorry for interrupting.
You know, like what you said about if you see yourself and your attitude towards your children in The Book Eaters, if you see yourself and your relationship with the city in Payback's a Witch, I mean, if you see yourself in Hannah, like, just, I'm sorry, and...
Yeah, I'm really sorry.
I hope that you find your way back to joy and away from contempt.
Whew, man, that's making me think that I ought to de-radicalize myself.
Right? Anyway, next week, assuming you can get through it, and I really hope you can, because boy, I want to process it with someone, is Unwieldy Creatures. A radical queer retelling of Frankenstein.
Indeed. The way that you said that fills me with foreboding and dread, but I will do my very best.
It is. I genuinely don't know how I feel about it, which is why I'm really interested to see how you feel about it.
All right, I will do my level best.
All right.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Yes. This has been cathartic for all of us.
Yes. Bye.
Well, this book mourns women's spaces. Well, there could be at home, where they were dancing with their friends or dancing alone. But back in 1991, well before this book was written. Yeah, back in 1991, well before this book's written, Jonathan Richman was in that bar. Oh, John was dancing in a lesbian bar.